Hello, my name is Emma, and in today's video, I'm going to talk about something I love, and that is travel. So if you like traveling too, if you're planning on going on a vacation, or if you know somebody who's traveling, this video will be very, very helpful to you. In this video, I'm going to teach you some very important verbs. They're all phrasal verbs, and I'll explain what a phrasal verb is in a moment. So these are all verbs that we use when we're talking about travel. Okay, so to get started, I wanted to tell you a little bit about phrasal verbs. What is a phrasal verb? One of the difficulties students have with English are verbs where you have a verb and a preposition. So when you see a verb and a preposition together, that's a phrasal verb. Now you might be thinking, what's a preposition? Good question. I'm going to give you an example. We have here 4 words. Each of these is a phrasal verb. They all have the verb get in, get up, get on, get over. And there's many more. Get away. There's tons of them. Each of these actually can have multiple meanings too. So one of the most difficult parts about English is learning phrasal verbs because the blue part is the preposition. It can change the meaning of the verb, okay? So prepositions are words like on, off, up, down, toward, over, away. These types of words are prepositions. So you'll notice with phrasal verbs, they're very, very common in conversation. You can write them down too, but in general, when people talk, they often use phrasal verbs, okay? So they're very, very important, especially when you're talking about going on a trip with your friends or family. So let's look at some of the common phrasal verbs we use when we're talking about trips. The first verb I want to teach you, drop off, okay? So drop is the verb, off is the preposition. Together, drop off is a phrasal verb. What does this mean, drop off? When you drop someone off, it means you're taking them to a place and then you leave them there. So for example, maybe your friend needs to go to the airport. So you drive them to the airport and you drop them off at the airport. This means you take them there and you leave them in that place. Okay, so they don't come home with you, they stay there. So for example, I have a friend named Frank. And when Frank goes traveling, we drop Frank off at the airport. So we drive Frank to the airport. He has all his luggage, his suitcases. And then we say to Frank, goodbye, Frank, have a nice trip. We drop Frank off at the airport. You can also use drop off in a lot of other situations. For example, when you were a child, maybe your parents, your mom or your dad, or maybe your grandparents dropped you off at school. This means that they took you to school, and then once you got to school, they would say goodbye to you, and they would leave. So drop off means you take someone to a place, and then you leave them there. You'll also notice, so I have here the verb and the preposition. Frank is a name of a person, and it's in the middle of drop and off. Okay, so these two are not together. We drop somebody off at the airport. Okay, so sometimes with phrasal verbs, for some phrasal verbs, you actually separate them and you can put the name of somebody between them. For other ones, you can't do that. For this one, drop off, you put the name between the two, between the verb and the preposition. So now let's look at another example of a common phrasal verb. See off. Okay, so again, we have off in both of these. See off is when it's similar to drop off, but it's a little bit different. Sometimes your family or your friends are going away for a long time. Maybe they're going on a vacation or a trip. So you want to see them off. It means you want to say goodbye to them at the airport, at the train station, maybe at their house. So it's that goodbye you say before somebody goes off on a vacation, okay? So for example, we see Frank off. Frank is going to Australia. So we go to the airport because we want to say goodbye to Frank. So we see Frank off is another way to say we say goodbye to Frank when he goes on his trip. All right, so now let's look at, and again, similar to drop off, notice where Frank is. We see Frank off. Frank is between the verb and the preposition. Okay, so we see somebody off. We see our mother off. We see our father off. We see our friend off. So this is the way you use this phrasal verb. Now let's look at some other phrasal verbs that have to do with travel. Okay, so our next phrasal verb is very important when we're talking about the airport. Okay, so if you've ever been on an airplane, you should know this word, take off. So the meaning of take off is this is when the airplane leaves the airport and flies away. Okay, so if this is the airplane, it takes off. Okay, it's the opposite of lands. So takes off means the airplane goes up into the sky. So an example of this is very simple. The plane takes off. Okay, the plane takes off at 7 o'clock. Again, takes and off are together. So there's nothing separating them. All right, what's another important phrasal verb? We also have get in. So this also has to do with the airplane. This is when the plane arrives at the airport. On an airport, plane arrives. Sorry. The plane arrives at an airport. Okay? So for example, Frank's plane gets in at 9 p.m. We can also use this for a person. Okay? When you say Frank gets in at 9 p.m., it pretty much means arrives. So Frank gets in at 9 p.m. Frank's airplane gets in at 9 p.m. We could also use this for train. Frank's train gets in at 9 p.m. So it means arrives. Okay, and we use it a lot when we're talking about transportation like planes and trains. Okay, the next one, check in. Check in and check out. These are very important for when you stay at a hotel or a hostel, okay? So when you check in, this means you register at the hotel. So for example, I want to stay at a hotel. I want to sleep at the hotel. I go to the hotel and there's somebody at the front desk. And what do I say to them? I say, I would like to check in. Frank checks in. Frank checks into the hotel. So this means Frank goes to the hotel and he tells them, I'm here, I want a bed, I check in. Now the opposite of this is check out. This is when you leave the hotel and you pay them the money for your stay there. So maybe you go to the hotel for 5 days. When you leave the hotel and you pay the money for those 5 days, that's when you check out. So we can say Frank checks out. Now let's look at a couple more phrasal verbs. Okay, so our next phrasal verb is set out. Okay, set out. So what does it mean? When you set out, it means you start, so keyword here is start, a journey, or you sometimes start a road trip. So it's the beginning of usually a journey or a trip. So for example, imagine Frank, he's at the hotel and he wants to go on an adventure. He wants to explore. Maybe I said he was in Australia, maybe he's in Sydney, Australia, and he wants to explore Sydney. So we can say Frank set out early to explore. This means that Frank starts his journey early, okay? If you've ever gone on a road trip where you drove your car somewhere very far, you know, maybe you drove your car for 3 days to go somewhere, you can say every day we set out early or we set out late. So this means we began our trip early or we began our trip late. So set out means to start a journey. Okay, our last one, very important, pick up. Okay, there's many different meanings of the word pick up. You can pick up the phone, you can pick something up with your hand. In this case, it's a little bit different when we're talking about travel. When we're talking about pick up here, we're talking about where you get someone from a place and then you take them to another place. So for example, when Frank comes home, I will pick Frank up from the airport and take Frank home. Okay? So it's where usually it's you're in a car, not always, but usually you pick somebody up with your car and you take them somewhere else. So for example, Michelle picks Frank up in her car. So maybe at the airport, she drives to the airport. Frank's there from his long trip in Australia. And she picks him up, not literally, she doesn't lift him up. No, with her car, she takes him from the airport to his house. Okay. So I'd like you to come visit our website at www.ingvid.com. And there you can actually do a quiz to practice all the words you learned today and the grammar in these words. So I hope you check that out. And until next time, take care.